You're listening to the podcast for all of the news, notes, and breakdowns for your Ohio State Buckeyes. This is Sons of the Shoe with Nick Wilson and Spencer German.
Sons of the Shoe is back. Nick Wilson, Spencer German. I guess Spencer German. There we go. Hi, guys. How you doing? Happy whatever the hell day it is that you're listening to the podcast. As we are a new podcast, we do ask you guys, make sure to follow the show wherever you get your podcasts. Apple, Spotify, the free Odyssey app, 923thefan.com, and as always, 923 The Fan's YouTube page. We will absolutely love you forever if you follow the show, and make sure to comment in the 923 The Fan YouTube section. Make sure to follow us at Nick Wilson Says, at Spencito _. But another glorious day in Buckeye Nation. Spencer, good day to you, sir.
How long are we able to say we're a new podcast? Like, what's the statute of limitations on that? I'm not saying it's wrong or it's bad, because it makes for easy promotions. We continue to hear those on 92.3 all the time. We continue to promote the show on here and say we're a new podcast. Is it up until like next season that we can continue saying we're a new podcast? Is that fair?
I would say until we get Bezos money. You know, when we've really hit pay dirt, and when we're like, I'll be honest with you.
So in the year 2045, we'll still be like, we're a new podcast as of 20 years ago.
until we get Joe Rogan numbers, I'm going to be calling us a new podcast. Until we get the 50,000 downloads loans a month, then I'll finally be like, you know what? We're a seasoned podcast. Follow us. We appreciate you.
Like Thanos at the end of Infinity War, we can finally just rest. We're not a new podcast anymore.
And then Thor can come along and chop off our heads. That was my takeaway with what happened with Thanos. You wipe out half the population, somebody's going to come along and chop off your head. And also you're going to disfigure yourself. I don't know. I just remember parts of that movie.
There might be some people, it sounds like there's some Michigan fans who quite enjoy chirping us in the comments who want to chop off our heads. So
I gotta say,
it's nothing new, really.
We are going, we do the Michigan Panic Meter in the third segment of every Sons of the Shoe. And every week we have to explain it to our friends from up north and even some of our Ohio State friends that it is about Ohio State's panic about Michigan. And this is the rare time. In the third segment today, we're actually going to do the unthinkable. We're going to go ahead and do the Michigan Panic Meter about Michigan, because
we're going to confuse everyone.
It has gotten real good and panicky, and we're going to have a lot of fun with that. But today really was about meeting the new transfers, and Ohio State made those football players available, including Quinshon Judkins, the running back out of Ole Miss. Caleb Downs spoke today, safety out of Alabama. And then the big news was Will Howard, the quarterback, K-State. And I will say, first observation, with the haircut he has now, if he puts on 50 pounds, he could have a big boy NIL deal that would blow your mind. He is 50 pounds shy. He's got like the little swoop going. He is 50 pounds shy of maybe the best big boy endorsement you could ever get. He also talked about a lot of stuff, but I just want to point that out there. He's got the swoop. He's got like whatever that Bama thing is that all men from Bama have a natural like comb over. He's got that. Very interesting young man.
Yeah, this was the first time we really got a chance to hear him talk and just kind of address how things kind of played out and his recruitment to Ohio State and leaving K-State. And he talked a little bit about like the valuable lessons and skill sets and different things that he had sort of picked up when he was at K-State and how that's going to apply now when he's at Ohio State. Sounds like a guy who is very much ready. I know we'll talk about this a little bit, but ready for the challenge of just, I think in general, the pressure that comes, because let's face it, like K-State is K-State. Yeah, it's a D1 program that's playing big time college football against some big time schools, but the pressure to succeed and win there is minuscule in comparison to what it is at Ohio State. It's part of the reason why Kyle McCord transferred in the first place, because he felt that pressure and didn't want to stick around for it when he got blamed for losing to Michigan. So, I think he seems like a pretty well put together kid. I'm fascinated to see now. I don't know that they're going to dub it as like a quarterback competition, but I am fascinated to see how it's kind of treated, and if there's a possibility that one of these other younger recruits that's now either and Julian Sayin from Alabama or obviously Air Noland, who was a recruit for this year, gives him a run at all. Or because the way that this was framed when they signed him was, yes, Will Howard is coming to Ohio State to be the starting quarterback, and just because that's what was said. And ironically, a colleague of ours, Brendan Gulick, who he covers Ohio State for Buckeyes Now, the SI site, and I had him on 92.3 a couple weeks ago, and he actually mentioned that was kind of his big thing, was that he's not 100% sure Will Howard's just going to be the day one starter. And I thought that was interesting. You know, it makes your ears perk up a little bit, because when it's sold to you that way, and when you see a big time recruit like that transfer into Ohio State, you just kind of assume, oh, they're doing it for that reason. But obviously the landscape has changed since then, when you got two really highly touted recruits at quarterback coming in as well. So it's a fascinating conversation.
You're going through about 12 of the different talking points. We can go through this. Why don't we first get to Will Howard today at media availability, talking about the idea of a quarterback competition and whether or not he'd be open to that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I wouldn't be here if I didn't feel like I was ready for it. And you know, like I said, my time at K-State kind of hardened me, and obviously it wasn't on the stage that this necessarily is. But I'm ready. You know, I feel like nothing that is worth getting ever comes easy, and you know, I feel like this opportunity here was just too good to pass up. And you know, people say what they want about me. You know, it's in one ear and out the other. You know, and obviously it's hard. You know, balancing that stuff, but you know, I've learned to kind of block it out and just try to be me and trust God and just be the best version of myself every day, and that's all you can do. Yeah.
So
absolutely.
There is a part of me that thinks whether he was promised the job or not, and I tend to think there was maybe not a promise, but a very strong like wink, wink. He would answer the question the same way. Like, no one's ever going to be like, no, I came here to be the starter and damn the competition. So there is a part of me just hearing that like, I don't think it automatically solves that he totally does expect to be in a competition. It also doesn't go the other way. Like, you can leave it open to the fact he might be being honest here, and he does expect an honest competition at quarterback.
Yeah, he definitely played it down the middle, very politically. For me, part of this conversation too just goes back to when it was announced that he was coming to Ohio State. A lot of the reporting centered around the idea that Ohio State singled in on him, and you know, this is why I think this conversation is interesting. It does leave the door open to make me at least contemplate that he could get beat out by Julian Sayin or Air Noland, because yeah, it was sold as, well, they promised him the starting job, A, but B, they kind of Ohio State. I think the wording on it from Pete Thamel, or who reported at the time, was Ohio State was patient and they had their eye on Will Howard and they waited out the process, and then they got their guy at the end. But we had reports like 2 weeks prior that they were interested in Riley Leonard, but he wasn't really budging on trying to go to Notre Dame. Like, that was where he was destined to go. So it's just funny to me that it was sort of thrown out that way. And I do believe, like, when they signed him, that was the intent. And I'm sure there's been, listen, I'm imagining there's probably some communications with Noland about, like, hey, you're going to come here and there's going to be, you know, we want you to get opportunities. We want to see what you can do. And we're not going to try to handcuff you. But at the same time, we're bringing in this quarterback who has the experience. We're going to try to start him this year. And he's everything we've heard about Air Noland is like, he's all in on everything, no matter what. Even when Sayin was signed, it was like, nope, he's not going anywhere. He's sticking around. So it doesn't seem like he's fazed by it. But more so just, like I'm curious, because it wasn't maybe the real first choice for Ohio State, if that means he's just for sure going to get it, or now that there's two different guys below him who are supposed to be really, really good, if it is going to be an open competition, kind of like what we saw last year.
Well, I mean, I think the one thing I probably didn't do enough of when they announced Will, and there was all that scuttlebutt with Pete Thamel, as you mentioned. I probably wasn't just skeptical enough about that messaging. I, in and of myself, whether it's a college team, a pro team, I just inherently don't trust messaging from the team because teams and programs have every reason to sell things in a specific way. And if you think about it, Will Howard was like the first guy you got in the transfer portal. Caleb Downs came later. He was kind of the last piece there. Obviously, Quinshon Judkins was kind of right behind Will Howard. But think about where Ohio State was when Will Howard was it was announced that Will Howard was coming to Ohio State. Michigan was on the precipice of a national championship. You had lost the Cotton Bowl kind of in an ugly way. You had lost to Michigan for the third straight year. You had to go to the wire to retain every single major prospect in your draft, including Jeremiah Smith and Edric Houston and Air Noland. And even though Air Noland was a solid verbal the whole time, like you look at that, it's not that I don't think it's real. It's not that I don't think they love Will Howard. But at the time, you needed a tent pole to build confidence around. And being able to bring in a quarterback that was a quantifiable, really good starting quarterback in college and then say he's the guy, I think that was just important to just kind of keep everybody in Columbus and lure people to Columbus, even if maybe you went to Will and said, listen, it's like 75% you're going to be the starter, but things could change, and we're going to give these other guys at least a chance to compete. And that could be anything from compete to be your backup. But if they outdo you, it might end up being outdoing you. And Will's options were either then to go immediately into the draft, or pick another spot. And Ohio State was the best of all the spots. So I like the idea of a quarterback competition. Whether that's a true quarterback competition, all five guys are available, all five guys are in it, and anyone can win it, or whether it's heavily skewed towards Will Howard, but that still cracks the door for the young quarterbacks. I would be really shocked if it was Julian Sayin or Air Noland, true freshman, beating out Will Howard.
Agreed.
But maybe a guy like Devin Brown, maybe you give Lincoln Keenholz a chance. Like, that's where all of a sudden I think, I think literally all five guys could hypothetically win it because they're all at Ohio State for a reason. I think it's probably 80% Will. And then let's see where the other four guys are.
Well, and the messaging thing you bring up is tough because you don't know where Pete Thamel's reporting is coming from. Like, that to me kind of read as like somebody fed him that from the team. Like it was like, this was our mess. And that's the thing that you're always trying to read between the lines on when that stuff comes out. And you bring up his options. That's what I think the holdup is for me of why I do still lean that it probably is. Like, again, maybe it wasn't like a handshake agreement, you're the starter, because Ryan Day goes out and he puts on a pretty face and says, like, everybody's got to earn their spot. Everyone's got to earn their job. And they did have an open competition last year, as we know. So I'm not saying it was like that, but I'm sure the intention was there of like, we're going to bring you in because we expect that you're going to be the starter. And so that's why I do lean heavily into the idea that it's going to be him. Because like you said, it's just hard, I think, for true freshmen of any skill level to step right in and be the instant starter at the college level. Like, the game's just different. Like, we've seen it numerous times for guys. Like, they got to kind of get a grip and understand things. And as long as guys are willing to sort of wait it out and see, I think that's, that's kind of what Ohio State's dealing with right now with these two recruits coming in. Then it usually works out where they both won't be able to start, but one of them will get that job probably next year. But yeah, because of what Will Howard's options were, like, he has to feel pretty good about the idea that he's going to be it. Otherwise, why stay in college, right? Like, he could have gone to the draft, like you said. He could have gone to another school. I get Ohio State's more enticing because the talent level that they have and all these different things. But if his goal of coming back was, listen, I'm coming back because I think I need to increase my profile. I don't really want to go into a class that's headlined by, Caleb Williams and Drake May and some of these other top guys that is going to drop my stock down. I want to kind of make a name for myself in a big program. I have to believe that on some level, it's not just him taking a gamble on his professional career, because if he doesn't play, if he loses that job, like, he's going to have even worse pro potential in the draft than he would have this year. So I have to envision that he's going to be the starter. But you're right, and the doors may be cracked open a little bit. And when you hear about these big name guys coming in, there's always the possibility that they could play well enough. And to your point, like you bring up Keenholz, you bring up Devin Brown, maybe those guys, like the team messaging around them was that they had a lot of faith in them. Leading up to the Peach Bowl, it was I always it was the Cotton Bowl, not the Peach Bowl.
Cotton Bowl, yeah.
I don't know why I always mess those two up. But leading up to the Cotton Bowl, it was all like, oh, everybody's really excited about Devin Brown. He's the next big thing, and he can run, and he can do all these different things. So maybe the competition is more so there than it is with the true freshmen. But obviously, the freshmen are the intriguing part of this conversation because they are so highly touted. They're two of the best quarterback recruits coming out of high school right now, and they're both at Ohio State. So, and there's always an anxiousness for fans to want to see those guys sooner rather than later, obviously, as well.
Well, and here's the other thing. You just never know in football. The same thing could be said. Julian Sayin could step on campus and he could be the obvious best quarterback in the room. So you always Air Noland could do the same thing. I don't think it's going to happen with Devin Brown. He looks too raw as a passer. It's funny because that's
you're holding out hope for Keenholz, though. I know.
I do love me some Keenholz, man. It's not because he's from South Dakota. It's just that kid's got a swagger about him. I think really does work. But I digress. I think you leave the door open for that reason. In case one of those guys just blows you away. Here's another thing: you just never know. Injuries do happen in spring ball, and when you're trying to anoint a quarterback. That's as much. Yes, you're trying to get him in the right spot where he's fully empowered. He's in charge of the offense. And so in a situation where you got a guy that's a clear favorite for the job, you want to do everything you can to give him a chance to win that job for his own mentals, in the words of Marshawn Lynch, but also in the eyes of the players. Will could go out there and he could struggle. And that could be a struggle for the guys to kind of rally around him. Conversely, he could ball out and he could just blow away dudes around him because of that mobility, because of that arm strength. You know what I mean? But the same could be said. He could also get hurt. And so by leaving the door open, you allow yourself, one, to establish a pecking order behind him if Will does win the job. And listen, I don't think all 5 guys are making it to Columbus this fall. I'm not guaranteeing. I would be surprised if one of those guys doesn't transfer out. 5 is a lot in a quarterback room, even on a 1-year deal.
Yeah.
But I digress. But the other part is, it's structuring it behind and letting those guys compete behind Will, so that if he got hurt, all right, hey man, it's obvious. It's Julian's chance to step up. Hey, it's obvious. It's Air's chance to step up. It's Lincoln. It's Devin's chance to step up. So, it's funny. I think some Buckeye fans were taking victory laps of, oh, well, this means he's really got to fight for the job. There was a myriad of reasons why it made sense to present him as the clear starter 3 weeks ago, and there's a myriad of reasons why you leave the door open, because you never know with injuries, you never know with performance, and you just never want to tell. 18-year-old kids coming into college football, especially. Air Noland, 2 4-star quarterbacks, you don't even have a chance. That doesn't open up the most competitive mindset. And everything needs to be on the board. Everybody's job. JT Tuimoloau, great player. His job needs to be on the line, or he needs to feel that way. Because I think you need to go into the regular season keeping everybody hungry. And I think when you start a quarterback competition, even if it's skewed, I think you lean in a direction where that really helps you.
I also think, too, we won't have an answer after the spring game. Ryan Day notoriously has not named, we're sitting here trying to sort of divulge this question and sort through it and figure out what the answer is and sort of what the situation is going to look like and who's going to be the immediate backup and who's got the best shot to sort of maybe supersede Will Howard. We won't know after the spring game. If Will Howard looks really good, we won't know. If Will Howard looks really bad, we won't know. When Justin Fields transferred in leading up to 2019, after the spring game, he didn't name him the starter. I think back then it was between Fields and I think Matthew Baldwin was the other quarterback at the time. So like he didn't name a starter after that. And then the only time he has known the starter was when it was the transitional year. So Fields started in 2019. In 2020, you knew it was going to be Justin Fields again. And then he did the same thing in 2021 where it was Fields, I think, versus just straight up McCord. There might have been somebody else in there if I forget the top of my head. But when it was Stroud and him, Stroud wasn't named starter up until August. So don't expect an answer for quite some time, I guess, is where I'm going with this. Like, I don't think we're going to have any clarity on, yes, it's definitely Will Howard's job come April when the spring game happens. But it should be interesting to see how those guys play and if there's anything that we can take away from what happens in the spring that tells us, or even like the reporting from practice and all these different things that tells us who maybe is closest to potentially upping the ante or jumping Will Howard for the job if it were to happen. But I'm like you, where I'm going in thinking like probably 75-80% sure it's going to be Will Howard, and then it's mostly just going to be about like who kind of emerges as that next man up, and that'll be kind of the storyline of the rest of the season if you were to get hurt. But then also going into the next year of like who's the top of the food chain.
All right, guys, are you expecting a true quarterback competition this spring? Are you buying into what Will Howard is selling, that he came here to compete for the starting job? I buy it about 75% or about 80% there. We have more comments from Will Howard on maybe the highest rated prospect in Ohio State history. We got to get into that. But first, a word from our sponsors. All right, guys. So as we have talked a lot about Will Howard's comments at media availability today, and real quick, before I forgot about this, when Quinshon Judkins, who I think people are already a little suspect of him leaving Ole Miss, and there were whispers about him and his teammates and all this, when he was asked, why Ohio State? The funniest answer he could have given is the one that he gave. Quinshon Judkins was quoted as saying, "Why not Ohio State?" That was just so damn funny. Of like, instead of being like, and he went on to talk about like the reputation of Ohio State with running backs, like the legacies of like Ezekiel Elliott and other great running backs. There were other things he said, but then when he just kind of went, but man, like, why not Ohio State? I just thought that is the funniest possible answer, and I applaud Quinshon Judkins. I might have to get a 4X Quinshon Judkins Buckeyes uniform this fall. That's how much I like that answer.
Well, let's be honest. I would imagine it's probably not the I would imagine playing for Lane Kiffin can kind of wear on you. I mean, come on. The guy's kind of well, for lack of a better word, the guy can be kind of a dick. So
what? No, Lane Kiffin. Sweet Christian boy, Lane Kiffin.
Man. So
I made fun of this on air today. There is a part of me that if any one of these guys came out, okay, Will Howard, Quinshon Judkins, Caleb Downs, why Ohio State? And they just did the money signs. Like, I would just respect it, because that is like not enough guys just go, I compared all the offers. I looked at my opportunity and realized I was about to make an ass load of money, and that's why I'm here.
Judkins is interesting. Like, money is probably part of it for sure, but Judkins is also interesting because like Will Howard, the scenario for him was he watches Kyle McCord transfer. Okay, he's going off to Syracuse, whatever. There's an opportunity here they're looking for a starter, so it could be me. With Quinshon,
and he's got the kid at Kansas State nipping at his heels, the young quarterback they've been developing there.
Right, exactly. So this is an opportunity to like be the starter somewhere and take that role completely. Quinshon Judkins is coming in like I guess he didn't know at the time if TreVeyon Henderson was going to stay, but he had to at least know that was a possibility. And so, yeah, like the money talks, that's probably part of it. But I'm just kind of like, he has to at least recognize he's going to go from Ole Miss, where he was the guy, he was the main back, and probably now accept a reduced role and be okay with that, knowing that like this is his last year to kind of make an impression before he goes off to the NFL potentially. So I think that's certainly, the money's certainly part of it, but there is, I think, some level of unselfishness there if he had to at least scan that situation and understand, like, and there's other motivations too, like you can win a national championship, the team's loaded, it's one of the better programs in the country and whatnot. But just the idea that he probably had to kind of come to grips with the fact that it's not just going to be him, and he was okay with that. And we know Trayvon's okay with that because he said before, like, he thinks that helps prolong his career. He's had injury issues already, so it's not a problem for him. But for him to kind of take that back seat too, I think is pretty telling.
Yeah, the one question we'll have to get into at some point this year is how do you share the ball with two great running backs, four guys who could be number one receivers or number two receivers at most programs in the country, and a quarterback who's a dual threat quarterback, who has mobility to him. So I think that'll be an interesting question this year.
I think a side conversation or a growth conversation off of that.
What kind of growth we talking about here, Kimo Sally? I love a good growth conversation.
Oh man,
got me growing.
Kind of growth. Not that kind of growth. No, I think another sort of offshoot of that conversation is there almost too much for both Ryan Day and Bill O'Brien to work with here? Like, how are they going to spread the wealth and get everybody involved and keep everybody happy while also with the mission of we're going to go win games? And I think most of the schedule that won't be difficult because it's the Big Ten, and we know Ryan Day has generally just owned the Big Ten anyway, even when he's had lesser teams than when he's used to, like this past year. But I think that's an interesting conversation as well. But yeah, how they utilize those guys will be fascinating. It's certainly something we have plenty of time to talk about this offseason.
Can't wait for a good growth conversation with you about Ohio State Buckeyes. We'll have to get whoever the plaster caster is these days. We'll have to get them involved in the conversation.
I'm so good at, when I'm looking for a word, I always pick the wrong one every time.
You don't understand. My job is to talk for a living. They pay me.
So's mine. So
at least, but my point is, like, the stakes for me when I'm on a live, like, this is taped. Okay. Sorry for anybody, any of the illusion there, but like, we've got a little bit of the pressure's not the same thing as when the FCC could be listening and you're
That's
searching
true.
for a word and everybody in the room is looking at you and you're not finding that word. Whatever word you go to is going to be like 12% of the word you were looking for. Oh my God. People will never know that pressure. It's the only potential trap of the job.
I mean, I was just going to say, I started this segment calling Lane Kiffin a D, and I didn't have to worry about it. So,
well, that one's true though. And I think we should be able, actually, there are radio stations that get to use the word dick on air. And I'm like 75% jealous of them, but
what you should do. This is like real down the 92 through the fan path, but you should, if you really want to use that word, you should just start saying, well, so-and-so is a Dick and Dayton. Then you get away with it every time. Time, because it's a name.
When we used to talk about Nick Foles and his
and by the way, I don't know if Dick and Dayton listens to this podcast, but that's not a shot at Dick and Dayton.
We're just using your name.
I'm just saying your name fits. It's like when the people throw out like the shit talking mushrooms so that they can say the word shit. Essentially, it's the same thing.
Yeah. Wow! Spoiler alert! Gosh, I can let everybody know the magic of radio. I also like the idea of. I totally lost what I was going to say. I had a great line. It was one of the best lines.
I'm sorry.
And now, no, it's not you. My brain literally stopped working in real time. But we were just. We just played some Will Howard audio talking about the idea of a competition. And one of the other big quotes to come out of today's mediavility, other than why not Ohio State, was Will Howard talking about Jeremiah Smith and that kind of first exposure, getting to know Jeremiah.
Dude, he's a dude, man. I haven't gotten to talk to him that much yet, just because we've been in different groups lifting and stuff. But, man, he's a specimen. I mean, that dude is a freak show when it comes to physical. I mean, he is – I'm excited to see him out on the field in live action. It'll be fun. And the thing that's impressed me the most about especially the receiver room is how driven they are and how much they want to work. I don't have to go out there and beg these guys to go catch. I mean, they're already out here catching on the jugs when I come out to throw. You know, it's like they're incredibly hardworking just all across the room. I mean, we got dudes like Carnell and Brandon Ennis and obviously Emeka and all those guys. Like, I mean, that's just tip of the iceberg. Like, there is so much talent in that room, and being able to throw to guys like that makes my job a lot easier. Dude.
So, one, the way he described Jeremiah Smith, in hearing him, he's a dude, you know, he's a specimen. I think you and I can both agree. I will never and have never, won't ever put in the work to ever be called a specimen. But I was a little jealous of Jeremiah Smith. Like, that is straight up a bromance right there. And I got to say, like, I do think, you know, we mentioned the numbers issue in Columbus. I think a lot of Ohio State fans got super excited about Jeremiah and then hit the brakes on expectations. That's a kid I'm not doing it for. I'm not putting a limitation on that kid. You know, Emeka has a chance to be a top 32 pick in the draft next year if he can just stay healthy. Carnell Tate, Brandon Ennis, and there's a couple other dudes. They got guys. But I think Jeremiah has a chance to step into a playmaking role that could just add a different level of lethal to this offense. They got probably 5 guys right now that could be future first-round picks if all goes right. I think the expectation is Jeremiah hits the ground running, and I think he's a big part. It's not even about touches. It's about his ability to make plays is going to put pressure on opposing defenses in a way that even if you just use him as a decoy 50% of the time, he's going to have an impact on games because of his playmaking ability.
Yeah, I mean, he's a dude. I mean,
he's a specimen.
He's a dude. He's just a good old dude.
It sounds like Will Howard's been having a good growth conversation about Jeremiah Smith.
I always love when dude gets like, when dude is the word that's used to describe somebody as like an adjective, like, yeah, he's a dude. And you're just like, can you elaborate a little bit more on what that means?
He's a total guy.
He's a dude, guy.
You know like, who he is? He's that guy.
Yeah. He's that guy, dude.
And not that other guy, not this guy. He is that guy.
He is that guy, dude.
Man.
Yeah.
Bro.
No, I think that Jeremiah has like we talk about freshmen that actually have a chance to see the field, have playing time, get out there and actually make an impact. And I think the way you worded it is right. I'm not putting a cap on how much or his ability to. Let me put it to you this way: like I think what a lot of times when these freshmen come to college, you go into it saying like, well, we won't see that guy for a couple years, right? And maybe I'm being naive for saying this because you know, Marvin Harrison Jr. was supposed to be this great talent, and we didn't see him until his second year. Really, once that, well, he kind of broke out in that Rose Bowl game, but still, it was like, you know, it took some time to get there. But I like Jeremiah Smith to me is supposed to be so talented, and I also here's the other thing. I think because of the nature of the NIL era, you can't get away with as much, even when you're Ohio State. I think you have to throw them a bone on some level. And the nice thing is there's the new rules as of, I forget how many years ago they changed it, but I think you can play in, I want to say it's 6 games. I might be wrong. It might only be 5, and you can still keep your redshirt ability. So there's a chance that you could use him in some bigger games, in some bigger spots, in some moments, and he still ends up redshirting and staying the extra year that you kind of won him around. So I think that's obviously an important lever for Ohio State to have at their disposal. But like that's a guy going in where I'm not going in assuming anything in terms of, oh, he won't play, we won't see him for a year. No, and based on the way Will Howard is describing him as a dude with a specimen of a dude of a man, I'm anticipating that they probably try to work him in some capacity. And obviously Emeka Egbuka coming back, maybe there's less usage there. If he had left, I think it would have been like a front line of Ennis, Tate, and him. But I do think on some level, like, they're going to utilize him. It's just a matter of how much. And if he basically exercises that entire red shirt availability or not, or if it's something that still is at his disposal. But yeah, I'm with you. I think there's a lot of potential that he starts or plays almost immediately for this team just because of the player that he is.
Well, and I think, and again, I might be misreading this, but I think a lot of people, including pundits and analysts and reporters, have said, I think if you ask them, they're probably closer to the extreme of, I'd be surprised if Jeremiah hit the ground running and was an impact at Ohio State across a majority of the season. And I get it. Like, we do put too much pressure on most of these kids, but there are special dudes. Caleb Downs was that guy last year. I mean, he broke in as a true freshman for Nick Saban on Nick Saban's preferred side of the ball, the defense.
Yeah.
And by the end of that season, he was clearly the best player at Alabama. And he wasn't the recruit that Jeremiah Smith on the offensive side of the ball. So I actually lean on the other side. Where I'm with Jeremiah Smith is at this point, I'd be more surprised if he doesn't make. I don't know. Immediate impact is that's okay. Is that game 1, game 4, game 8, whatever? But like, I think we're going to be able to look back next January on this podcast and say to ourselves, man, we were way too cautious with our expectations. I'd be shocked if this kid, for more than half the season, doesn't make some kind of impact, because some dudes just have it. Some dudes are just built different. Some dudes are just ready for the moment. And that doesn't mean he'll be the best version of himself, but at least making plays, at least using that elite playmaking ability in a myriad of ways. I would be really shocked if he doesn't come out and make an impact on this football season. It's somewhere in the first half of the season.
I agree. And you mentioned pressure. I think the nice thing for him is, I don't want to say there's no pressure. We just talked about there being pressure with Will Howard, and it's Ohio State, and there's a lot of high stakes. And when you're as high of a recruit as he is, there's going to be pressure no matter what. But because he's coming to a program that is just pumping out year after year, great wide receiver after great wide receiver. I mean, you look around the NFL right now, and you can find probably 5 receivers that are in or borderline at least top 20. If we're going to throw Marvin Harrison in there, because I think Marvin Harrison's Jr. is an instant top 10 wide receiver in the NFL once he gets drafted. Like, there's probably 4 or 5 guys that are already top 20 wide receivers that went to Ohio State. And I think because that's the culture, because that's what the machine that they are at that position specifically, you're coming into a situation where the pressure can not fully be taken off you, because it's going to be all eyes on you every time he's on the field. It's the same thing with like Arch Manning at Texas. It's why when they were doing their press conferences leading into the semifinal game, Quinn Ewers had like 2 reporters, and everybody was talking to Arch Manning at the booth behind him, because like, he's just a star. And I think it's the same sort of thing. Like, everybody's going to have all eyes on Jeremiah Smith because he is that level of recruit. But I do think because there's some really talented guys ahead of him who have a little bit more experience, Emeka Egbuka most notably, like, they're not going to let him just go out there and be like the punching bag, or, he's going to have some of that pressure taken off of him, and he's just going to be able to go out there and I think play football, which is what you would hope. And I think that'll also allow him to get in there early and make some plays and see what he can do, so that maybe down the stretch of the season, if you really need him to make a big play for you, where he does get more involved, that he will. So I'm right there with you. I think, and I do think your way of looking at it of what will we be saying about him next year is kind of a good perspective to have, because I think going in, it's easy to say, oh, he won't play. But I think a year from now, agreed, we'll be sitting here saying, man, how about the year that Jeremiah Smith had? I can't wait to see more of him as a more frontline guy even next year.
All right, guys, where do you lean? Do you lean more in Jeremiah Smith is not going to have a big impact next year, or that he will? I think it's a lot more likely that he will, as you and I have kind of talked about here. Leave your answer in the comments there on 92.3 The Fans YouTube channel, or at Nick Wilson Says, or at Spencito_ on social media, including X. But when we come back, we're finally doing what Michigan fans have been accusing us of doing with the Michigan Panic Meter. Usually, the Michigan Panic Meter is assessing our panic about the state of Ohio State and Michigan's rivalry. Now, we have to get to Michigan's panic, which apparently came out of nowhere over the last week. That's next. But first, a word from our sponsors. Welcome back, guys. Now, if you know Sons of the Shoe podcast, which you can follow wherever you get your podcasts, including Apple, Spotify, Stitcher. I don't think Stitcher exists anymore. The free Odyssey app, wherever. You guys know the third segment of the show starts off every single time with the Michigan Panic Meter. And so we usually go from gray to scarlet. And gray is the least amount of panic. Scarlet is the most amount of panic. In this case, and I didn't think we'd be doing this soon. I kind of thought something would have to happen to trip this conversation up.
Well, something happened.
And it's two things, really.
Growth.
And we're going to get to it in a moment. Another growth conversation for me here. But we're going to go ahead and do the first ever and maybe only ever true Michigan Panic Meter. Now you're thinking to yourself, why would Michigan panic? They just won the national championship. Now it would be a lot for me to then accuse them of panic if I didn't have an immense amount of proof. Twofold, in fact. One is there is a petition going around online by Michigan fans to fire athletic director Ward Manuel. And there are valid points about the state of basketball.
because he botched. But the big one is because he botched the Jim Harbaugh contract negotiation.
Yes, but again, they reference basketball. There's a third coach that was second coach that was allowed to leave. I can't remember the program. And then obviously the big one is the assumption is by these Michigan fans that Ward Manuel is the reason Jim Harbaugh left. The second thing is the panic on Michigan and Michigan fans. There's a select amount of Michigan fans on Michigan message boards that are destroying Jim Harbaugh because he has now taken three of his assistants with him. His son, Jesse Minter, the defensive coordinator, and then Ben Herbert, the strength and conditioning coach. And the first two were expected. But apparently something happened when you take Ben Herbert, the Michigan strength and conditioning coach, that these people lose their mind. They're worried about fucking stretching. In the words of Bob Wiley, Towa was. So I just want to say here, I think Michigan has gone from full maze, no panic, to I think they're at least halfway in between maize and blue, because I think people are starting to bug the hell out here.
I will. So I'm not going to defend the people who are mad about the strength and conditioning coach. I will say I kind of get where that comes from, because the messaging from college teams is always that the strength and conditioning coach is like that heartbeat of the team guy. He's like the rah, build the culture. Like you're working with them on the regular because you're lifting with them. They're putting you through drills, all this different stuff. So I guess I can kind of understand where, like, if they really loved him and they thought he was this rah guy, why they'd be like, well, I can't believe you took him. But it's obviously well within Jim Harbaugh's right to take whatever coaches he wants from his staff that he assembled there with him to the NFL. It's a pretty common practice. So what also is funny to me is like the math doesn't add up on this fully, because you're mad that Ward Manuel apparently botched the Jim Harbaugh situation. And so instead of being like, oh man, yeah, like we really wish you would have stayed, Jim, and just like kind of like, not sympathizing with him, but like being like, oh yeah, it just stinks and we feel bad. Your reaction then to Jim Harbaugh taking coaches with him is like, well, you can't do that. Like that doesn't add up to me. Like if you're mad at Ward Manuel, it just should be Ward Manuel's fault. You then can't be mad at Jim Harbaugh because he's just doing what all coaches do.
You know what the Ward Manuel thing is? The Ward Manuel thing is when one of your best couple friends splits up and you realize that you got stuck with the turd of the marriage. Right? And it happens to everybody where for some reason, like you don't get to choose. Maybe they choose, maybe it just happens, maybe one of the people move away and you get stuck with the lesser end of the marriage and then you're just stuck there. And that's Ward Manuel. Ward Manuel dicked over Jim Harbaugh endless amounts of time. I mean, they had to have the president of Michigan call a ceasefire last year. That's how negative things have gotten. Ward Manuel was behind the contract kerfuffle 2 years previous to that. I mean, Ward Manuel fucked around and found out. And so, like, listen, I fully expect him to be the sacrificial lamb in a year if Michigan is a 10-win team and they take a step back.
Yeah.
Fully expect that if Michigan basketball gets any worse, and guys, it isn't great. I'm not a big Michigan basketball fan, but I do pay attention because of Juwan Howard. It's in a really bad situation, as low as Michigan's been in a minute. I could see Ward Manuel being the first thing thrown over the board of the Titanic. And the reality is, it probably should have happened the second the guy dicked with Jim Harbaugh's money and started a needless war with the head football coach who was, albeit not where they wanted him to be, also not where they had been with either Brady Hoke or Rich Rodriguez. So to me, the Ward Manuel thing's a matter of time. I think it's fait accompli.
Yes.
At some point, he's going to be the sacrificial lamb.
So real quick, two things. First of all, maybe the better way to word what I was trying to say on why things don't add up is you can't be like, well, it's all Ward Manuel's fault. We hate you. And then because the guy that you wanted to stay, Jim Harbaugh, he takes coaches and you're like, well, fuck you, Jim Harbaugh. Like that's more what it's like. It's like you're mad at Ward Manuel, but then because you lost this guy that you're apparently like fawning over, but because you use the breaking up example, or like the divorce example, it's like one of those like, well, if I can't be with you, then no one can. So you're just like getting like resentful for no reason whatsoever, other than the fact that he left you behind. Second thing, because you mentioned Ward Manuel at some point being the sacrificial lamb, and I 100% agree. What's funny is he went from it was a 180 this year, right? Because you went straight from, at least I'm pretty sure he was part of like those statements that got put out when the whole cheating Connor Stallions thing happened. It was a 180 because he knew he was what's the phrase I'm looking for? He knew that he was benefiting off the
growth conversation,
the teat of Jim Harbaugh's success. So he quickly pivoted from, oh yeah, there's been all this bad blood over the years, to, oh, we back Jim Harbaugh and anything slanderous against him is completely false and wrong or whatever. So he was real quick to pivot when that whole thing happened. But this goes back to my conversation when we were talking about Ross Bjork, because I never know how to judge ADs truly, because on one hand, Ward Manuel was now going to be, he can say he was the AD that was behind Jim Harbaugh when they won a national championship. And that will always be something like, if he goes somewhere else, there'll be a fan base out there that's like, oh yeah, Ward Manuel, he got a national championship at Michigan. Like, I love this hire. But then the people in Michigan will say, well, this guy sucks ass. He lost Jim Harbaugh. He was constantly fighting with him. Like, there's always so many reasons to hate the guy, and there's always so many reasons to love a guy. And at the end of the day, like when an AD gets sacked, it's often like one or two major reasons that revolve around either your basketball program or your football program that are the reasons why people hate you. And that's what it's going to be with Ward Manuel. We're just going to look back and say, well, this guy sucked because he lost Jim Harbaugh. That will be his legacy there. But there'll be people who are just blinders like, well, he could be a good AD. Look what he did while he was at Michigan. So it's why there's no way to grade ADs ever. It's just go ahead.
The Ward Manuel thing, I think, one, I don't think it's going to get him fired now, but I do think it's the most valid of the points. Message boards flipping out on Jim Harbaugh and accusing him of somehow being unloyal to Michigan after everything he did.
That Ward Manuel put him through, yeah.
Yeah, it's really disingenuous. And listen, Jim could take every single assistant that isn't Sharon Moore to the NFL, and you should still kiss his ass and thank your lucky stars he didn't quit with that contract snafu 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah.
So, like, I'm sorry, if a coach comes in and hires a staff, that staff has incredible success, what's the difference between Jim Harbaugh taking to the NFL and Alabama coming in and offering Ben Herbert twice as much money to be the strength and conditioning coach? There's literally no difference other than they're just going with the guy that they had the most success with. So I think that to me is the most comical side of this is Michigan fans freaking out over Jim Harbaugh. You should probably be thankful he's only taken 3 guys to this point because he's already linked up with Greg Roman or David Shaw as his offensive coordinator, 2 old assistants that he's had. Like, just be thankful. Be thankful with where you are and understand that, like, this is all part of success. And what I think it underlines is there is concern about Sharon Moore stepping into a job and then immediately having to replace almost half of his on-the-field staff. But that speaks to that kernel of doubt that should be there, hiring a first-time head coach as the successor to the guy that just had the most success in team history for the last 25 years in winning the first national championship since 97.
Well, and a lot of this too, Nick, boils down to just denial. Because like, frankly, yeah, you can blame Ward Manuel. You can say he botched that relationship. And in a lot of ways, as we've laid out, he did. But from all accounts, everything that was reported about this contract that he had on the table, they were going to give him the sun, the moon, the stars. They were willing to make him, exonerate him from any punishments that could come. He couldn't get fired, all this different stuff. They gave him everything. The one stipulation was that he couldn't pursue an NFL job this year. And at some point, like, Michigan fans are just going to have to come to terms with the fact that, like, this guy came to Michigan. He stayed loyal through a lot of bullshit that he had to deal with. And then when push came to shove, but when push came to shove, he was always going to have his eyes on the NFL. That's what I mean. And how many years do we hear, like, Jim Harbaugh could be a hot candidate for the NFL? And there were some years where it wasn't as hot of a topic because Michigan wasn't winning and they were losing to Urban Meyer. And it was like, okay, we don't really care. But once he started sort of winning and turning the program around and doing the consistent thing, it was like 3-4 straight years of, he has links to the NFL. He wants to get back at some point. I mean, we've been hearing this forever. So at some point, like, you just have to stop living in denial and understand, like, it wasn't all on Ward Manuel. Like, some of it was, but Jim Harbaugh just wanted to go back to the NFL, and that is what it is. And he's going to take the staff with him that he takes with him. I guess for my Michigan panic meter, like the true version of the Michigan panic meter, how much stock do we put in the fact that these message boards speak for most of the fan base? That's my big question. Like, is it just, are the message boards kind of like what we think Twitter is, where it's like we hear this vocal minority of the fan bases, or is it like legitimately we should put a lot of stock in the Reddit pages and all this?
I mean, I think Twitter is just a smaller sample size than message boards because message boards have been around for
That's
20
true.
years.
Larger community, yes.
And larger community, and it is a way for people to stay in connection with each other. Now, do I still think it's 50% of the fan base? No, like Keith Britton, who works on our show as a producer on Afternoon Drive. He's one of the biggest Michigan fans I've ever met. He thinks both of these things are ridiculous. He might have qualms about Ward Manuel.
Didn't he also say that Jim Harbaugh wasn't leaving, though?
I believe he was skeptical at one point that he would leave. But I mean, no, I just think, like, I don't think message boards are the end-all be-all, but I think they're a healthy representation of where fans are. And I think, listen, I think what this points to, because panic ebbs and flows, as we found out with the Michigan panic meter that we do about Ohio State and our panic with Ohio State. So it does ebb and flow, but it does illustrate a point I made when talking about the difficulties of the job that Sharon Moore is stepping into. Because the reality is everybody's behind you until that first loss. Everybody's behind you until that first loss to Ohio State. And listen, I think Sharon Moore, because he technically already beat Ohio State last year, should be given a gimme this year when Michigan loses to Ohio State. That's probably not how it works, though.
No.
That's the kind of thing you say in January. That's the kind of thing you say in May, but it's not the reality of November.
Look what Ohio State, like how quickly Ohio State fans, it went from we own Michigan, and then the first we've been saying Ryan Day should be fired. Not we, but the fan base has been saying Ryan Day should be fired since that first loss to Michigan in 2021. They've been saying it ever since. And every year after, it's been louder and louder and louder. So I think it's the same thing. Like at the second, it's easy to sit in your ivory tower right now and be like, well, we're the national champs, and we're not worried about Sharon Moore. But I think a lot of that is just it's PR, it's branding from the fan base. Like you're letting somebody into your house for dinner, and you have happy faces on, and then they leave, and behind the scenes, like you and your wife are feuding with each other and going through a divorce. Like that's almost what it feels like, because they're playing the part of, oh, we feel good about Jerome Moore and we're not worried because we just won a title. But behind the scenes, I think there really is some panic sort of brewing of like, well, our time at the top might be coming to an end here. And I don't want to go back to where Michigan was before, Harbaugh finally got it together and started beating Ohio State. And that feeling of that, that might be what happens. I'm not saying it is, especially next year. Like there's still going to be enough talent there. I think that they stay afloat and maybe they lose a couple games, but it's not like complete disaster. Not that it ever was with Harbaugh. He was never losing. Like he had the COVID year, which was bad, but that was a fluky year for everybody. But yeah, like if they go back to just losing to Ohio State consistently, I don't think Michigan fans are willing to accept that. And I also just think the panic that we're seeing sort of just speaks to like, what have you done for me lately? And I get it on some level. It's had to have been an emotional roller coaster. You go win a national championship, but then 2 weeks, 3 weeks later, your coach is the coach that brought you there is leaving. So this is the most recent thing. And on some level, I'm sure Michigan fans probably are looking back, relishing like, well, I'm glad we got this moment because it might not be lasting very much longer. And they got to kind of live with that. I guess I'll put my meter, if we're assuming white is kind of also in the middle here of the maize and the blue, I'm probably going to lean.
That's Michigan. So.
I'm just in the white, leaning slightly towards the blue. And it's funny. I think, like I said, I think Michigan fans who listen to this, they're going to be in our comments like, what do we have to panic about? Ohio State's going out there and trying to add all these recruits because they can't beat us, blah, 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 blah. But I think behind the scenes, there's like a small internal panic brewing.
I would say to those Ohio State fans, we do appreciate you commenting in the 92 Through the Fan, the YouTube channel. Please continue to do so. I would say after commenting on our page, maybe go to those message boards and speak some of that cockiness. Because I think to what you're saying is, I do think like you present a different message to your foe than you do your friends. Mm-hmm. And I'm not buying this kumbaya shit. I'm just not. Now, that doesn't mean that the sky is falling, but you mentioned it. I think it would be like when Urban left and Ryan took over. I needed to see the team go out with Ryan. He was a first-time head coach. It's totally different. Like when they hired Urban and he had 2 national championship rings. It's totally different than when they hired Tressel, and Tressel ran Youngstown State to multiple national titles at that level of football. It's totally different when it's a guy's first job at that level. Now, what I would say is I think at Ohio State, it's tougher to be a first-time head coach than at Michigan, but it will for next year, it's going to completely revolve around probably hitting the 10, 11 win threshold overall and beating Ohio State. And if you don't do one or both of those things, it's not going to take much to get people panicking in Ann Arbor, because that's how we act. That's what we do in college football. That's just the reality of the situation.
You brought it up last episode, but it's different. Like, I think the other thing that Michigan fans are falling back on right now is like, well, Sharon Moore already beat Ryan Day, so what are we worried about? But I think you brought up the big point last episode. The prep work leading up to that game was all Jim Harbaugh because he could hold the practices, and B, it's different when you're the guy. He was the guy for a day, and there's no pressure of like, hey, when you leave that stadium, you go back to just being your role and dealing with what you got to deal with. Now you got to deal with everything. So it's different. And I think the best way to sum up kind of what we're alluding to, which is like the persona that fans are giving off right now, Michigan fans, that is, you've seen the movie Deadpool, right?
Oh yes. Many a time.
You know the scene where he shows up at the door of Professor X of like the X-Men, and I forget the joke that they make, but they say something, they call him a name or whatever, and Ryan Reynolds like laughs, and he goes like, "Ha, fake laugh to hide real internal pain." That's what it is.
Yep.
Michigan fans right now are like, they're fake laughing in our faces. They're like, "Oh, you guys have to go out and get all these recruits because you can't beat us, and we're fine." And Sharon Moore, but meanwhile, you're trying to get your AD run out of town because you think he botched the Jim Harbaugh thing, and you're pissed off, and you're crying because Jim Harbaugh is taking your assistant coaches and strength coaches. Like, there's a little bit more than meets the eye. If you need to talk to somebody about it, Nick and I will gladly be. This is a good idea for a future episode. We can be Michigan fan therapy sessions. We will offer them to you 20-minute blocks on Sons of the Shoe, or just in the comment section on the 92 Through the Fan YouTube.
I think that's stealing a Baskin and Felt bit, which we just, on principle, I refuse to do. But to the Michigan fans,
we got some people who really enjoy that show. So
Michigan fans they're smarter than us. I've always said that.
Yeah.
But Michigan fans, this is your one chance, right? You're always commenting on the Michigan Panic Meter here. Leave the comments, 92 Through the Fan YouTube. We've got maize. We've got light maize. We've got white. We've got light blue. And we've got the full blue. And maize being the least panicked, blue being the most panicked, and obviously the three levels in between being some iteration of that. Where do you guys stand? Wanting to fire Ward Manuel, Jim Harbaugh rating your staff, 92 Through the Fans YouTube comment section there. We will interact with it there. Ohio State fans, we also want to hear what your guys' thoughts on today's show were. Please make sure to follow the show everywhere you get your podcast. Apple, Spotify, the free Odyssey app, 923thefan.com. And make sure to hit the old follow on 92 Through the Fans YouTube channel as well. That does it for us. Go Bucks, Spencer. Great show.